Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to our Michigan Game Day show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. In just a few minutes, we'll be joined by Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic. First, a few of my thoughts to get us going. Good news that Mike Hart is joining the staff and the team via Zoom this week for meetings. There is no word as to when he'll return to the team. Sharon Moore said on Wednesday, that's up to the doctors. We all know how big this game is for both teams. Penn State wants to validate its solid start, and we want to show everyone we're a contender. This really is a tipping point game on many levels. A loss by either team doesn't mean they're out of the Big Ten East race. It would just mean you have zero margin for error the rest of the way. Last year's game in Happy Valley was a nail-biter of an affair between two equally talented teams. I'd like to see us win comfortably on Saturday, I always do, but my gut tells me we're going to be watching a heavyweight fight. In my mind, this is a must-win game for Michigan. From a pure talent perspective, once again, these teams are evenly matched. It will come down to big plays, mistakes, and special team play. It always does. My guest today does agree with me. This is a must-win game for Michigan. Up next with his always interesting thoughts on our Wolverines is Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic. So stay with us. With us on the show today to take a look back at what we saw in Bloomington on Saturday, and of course ahead to the big one in the big house with Penn State, is Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic. Great to have you back with us again, Nick.
Always good to be here, Mike.
Well, before we look ahead to this Saturday's game, let's spend a few minutes looking back at Saturday's Indiana win. Given everything that happened in the first half with Coach Hart, were you surprised at how Michigan struggled in that first half against the Hoosiers?
No, I'm not, for more reasons than probably just that. To be honest, I think when you look at that game going into the game, Tom Allen, obviously, when you look at it now, we have the hindsight, I believe they've made a staff change since then. He fired an offensive line coach, and they're shaking some things up. But what that tells me, Mike, is that going into that game, and we know that Tom Allen circles some games on the calendar and can get the guys maybe more cranked normally than he normally does, which is at a high level anyway. But I think this was a game for them that was going to be a big measuring stick. Like, if it doesn't work today, we're going to have to make some changes type of game. So I thought Indiana was going to throw a lot at them, and it was going to have to be a big – I thought this was going to be a huge test for McCarthy and the whole thing on the road because I thought they were going to get a really good shot from Indiana. And, when you're as good as Michigan is right now and you're at the spot that they're at and you have things to work on, but you're also better than most teams you're playing, like that, Mike, that's the standard that you're going to get held to, right? Like, you should blow everybody out and all this sort of thing. So, frankly, no. I mean, it was a tie game, right? I think at halftime. And, I mean, that it's the Big Ten. I think Indiana is a good program. They don't necessarily have the talent that they always would like to have, but I think that's a good program that fights really hard. And I don't really like to get down on teams that struggle with Indiana too much because historically it's not been a good barometer for this is a sign of something bad to come. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
That, to me, wasn't shocking.
Well, J.J. McCarthy had, of course, to throw more on Saturday because IU was so committed to stopping the run. So your thoughts on his overall performance, Nick?
Well, I thought it was very good. I thought, he's had a lot of firsts, and I think Harbaugh talked about the first 300-yard game. He had, the first road win, I believe, which wasn't this week. It was last week. So, he's had his batches of firsts, I guess, and it wasn't his first interception either. It wasn't his first turnover in this game. But I thought this was the first big test that he had in the old, what I like to call the Harbaugh quarterback test of, Jim and John have talked about this, and Jack, over the years. There's no truer test of a quarterback than when he throws an interception, preferably on the road in a close game, and then he finds a way to not only leave that interception there on the ground, but bounce back, lead the team down and score, and then come back and win the game. And that's what he did. And for a young quarterback to let it go and leave the pick that he threw in the end zone there and just move on and not blame anybody or just forget it and then go win the game, like that's a maturity level on display that's pretty high there. So that was the most impressive day, I think, frankly, from a management standpoint that McCarthy's had, period. That was as impressed as I've been with him at any point in his time so far.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, it was another big work day for Blake Corum. 25 carries, went over the 100-yard mark again. And, the more I watch him, I thought I'd never say this about Blake, but he looks like he gets stronger as the game goes on, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think it's that weight that he gained, right? I think it's, he's up to 210 now. That's something that we've noticed, doing a lot of the evaluations for the draft next year, which was, when Corum came in, he was probably 185 pounds, maybe 180. And that was, if he ate a couple sub sandwiches that morning, right? So he was really small, and we knew he had the speed, and we knew he wasn't afraid of contact. I think that was the thing that everybody was surprised at when he showed up. But it was like, man, he's got to find a way to bulk up because he's not going to be able to handle this. For me at the time, it wasn't even about like the NFL. It was like he's not going to be able to handle the Big Ten like at that size. So he's going to have to bulk up. To his credit, he did, early and often. And then this year, all the way up to 210, I think that was a concerted effort by him in Michigan to make sure that he was ready physically to handle a lot of the dirty yards this year, I call them, the stuff that Haskins got last year, things that they were going to ask him to do. That big run that he had for the touchdown is a between the tackle gap play that he just makes on his own.
Mm-hmm.
Like those are things that last year Haskins is running and getting 7 or 8 yards, and Corum is now cutting back against the grain and getting 60-yard touchdowns. And, he has the stamina. We've seen now for a couple weeks in a row, he's been able to carry the ball, high 20s. Yeah, he is. The arrow, as Harbaugh would say, is all the way up. I mean, Blake Corum is playing terrific football. The one thing I'd like to see that we haven't yet from him, Mike, is more with the hands, more in the pass catching game. If they can, I wouldn't force it if I was Michigan, but I think that there's more there. I think they can get more out of that. And that remains to be seen, but a great start to the season for him and exactly what they needed really, because there was a void there. There was a hole, and Edwards got hurt. They needed somebody to step up, and he's been aces. He's been a terrific player. I think, Mike, he's probably on pace to have one of the best yardage seasons since Mike Hart, if you look at it. And I can't imagine that there'd be a guy that would have a claim to be playing better through a 7-game period in that time since Mike Hart. I mean, it's been that good of a start for Blake Corum, I think.
No, I absolutely agree with you. The only thing I wonder about is, I mean, he's getting these 25, 30 carries a game, and it was out of necessity for the past few weeks because, Donovan was getting healthy and getting back into rhythm. So now, I when I watch the game, I think, he's in a rhythm now, clearly, after 6 games. He's shown that he can handle that 25 to 30 carries. But don't you think you still want to get Donovan more carries?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that as time goes forward here, and as he has gotten further away from that injury, I think you probably feel better about maybe loading more on his plate. Maybe once, especially this weekend and going forward, the physicality is going to crank up here, as we know. So not just Donovan, but I would also, add the whole crew. I mean, I know they've rotated Stokes in there too, but I mean, this would also be a day, and as you go forward, I think this is a day where you start getting guys like A.J. Henning more involved in the run game too. You know what I mean? Like, see if you can find a way to manufacture, 3 sweeps a game for him or something like that to take some loads off. So I think there's a lot of ways they can take stuff off of Corum's plate, which is the great thing about this offense. But the best news, Mike, I think, is that if and when they need it, he's got it. And like sometimes, as we've seen over the years, sometimes you just need to leave a guy out there. And I don't know if it's rhythm or just you trust him more than you trust everybody else. Sometimes in college, you just need to leave a guy out there and let him go win you the game. And I think Blake has proven that he can kind of do that for him.
No, absolutely. And when I was watching the offense operate on Saturday, I thought to myself, I know a lot of Michigan fans are saying, well, we're not maybe where we wanted to be right now at the midway point of the season, but this offense is statistically in the top 10 in just about every category. But
right.
Still, I get the feeling watching it, they haven't scratched the surface of their potential yet, Nick.
Well, no, I mean, they're not doing a lot with, it's all that's there with the run game, all that's there with a lot of the motion and all the different tricks and things that we ended up seeing late in November last year, and all the stuff that we saw them sort of, I guess, tease, we'll say, with McCarthy during his little spots here and there. All those things, I guess, would still be on the table. And all those things can, and I imagine will be on the way, the different variations and things and the cool stuff that we all think about. But more importantly, I think what we've seen is J.J. McCarthy through the handful of starts here, and they've handled this very well, continuing to expand the base package of throws and concepts that just he has on his sheet every week. I think as that grows, and as they continue to sort of say, okay, well, this week we went in with like 4 3rd and 7 calls that we liked. Next week we're going in with 8, right? Like I think that I don't know what that number would be, but as that grows throughout the call sheet, and I think with JJ as good as he is and as talented as he is, you can sort of continue. And we talked about that a lot with Cade last year. With he is smart enough to handle more. Well, JJ is not only smart enough, he's physically capable enough to handle like even more than that. So as you just grow the offense and as more throws become available to you as a play caller on, like if it's 3rd and 10, don't be afraid to do certain things because he can make the throw. Like those are the things that I'm curious to see as you go forward. Not necessarily, how efficient does it look play to play against a team that you should be rolling over. But when you get into a tough game and it's 3rd and 11, are you going to be willing to willing to draw something up where he can put the ball over the middle and get you 15 yards because he'll do it? Like those are the throws and those are the spots and the moments that I think in this game, there's a few of them in there. Those are the ones, especially Saturday against Penn State, that I think we'll start to see more of, or at least he'll be put in those situations where he'll be tested, and we'll get to see if how he responds.
Well, Nick, let's talk about the defense for a minute. They gave up some yards to Indiana in the first half. Of course, a lot of that was because Indiana came out, went up tempo, started throwing to the perimeter, testing those Michigan linebackers. In the second half, it was a shutdown. But at this point, I think we have to say it's a pretty darn good unit, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, it's a team group. I think that there are certainly holes, but it's a team group like everybody thought it would be, and it's getting a lot of really good individual efforts. And I think Mike Morris continues to be the guy. I think he had 8 pressures against Indiana, per PFF anyway. And when I was looking at the numbers before this game, and it's up to 26 on the season and the raw numbers. Before this game, Mike Morris was, I think, 1 or 2 in the country in terms of like just pressures from a pass rush, obvious 3rd down, obvious passing standpoint. He was like up there where Hutchinson was last year in terms of the rankings. I mean, that is how productive from a pressure standpoint Mike Morris has been. I mean, when we talk about replacing things that you lost, he hasn't replaced all of the stuff that they lost with Aiden Hutchinson, and it's not fair to ask that. But I think he's probably replaced more than maybe they would have even hoped. And I think that they hoped for a lot, if that makes any sense. And I think you're just getting some really good efforts up there from a lot of guys. People have talked about Iabioki and what he's been able to add. I know Harbaugh talks a lot about Mason Graham and some of the growth they've gotten, from there and all that. But I look at the guys that we expected a lot out of when the year started, and they're delivering a lot. And Mike Morris is number one on that list, I think, right now. Maybe even like of anybody on the team. Like, he has been rock solid, and they have some issues that they have to figure out. And I think Jesse Minter still has to get comfortable and prove that he can, do this against, really good offensive coordinators in the Big Ten. That'll be a big test this week. But man, alive, has it helped to have a response from a guy like Morris. Jenkins is playing well in there too, but Morris was the guy that I think we all looked at, going into the season. And if you really knew this team, you looked at him and you said, well, if he plays the way he can play, they'll be better up front than you think. And I think that's what we've seen so far.
Well, Nick, this Saturday, the rubber meets the road, so to speak. Penn State rolls into the Big House, and we know they're a good team. Sean Clifford back at quarterback. Seems like he's been there forever.
Yes.
A lot of people, I mean, even Penn State fans will say, are we going to see the good Sean Clifford or the bad Sean Clifford? You never know. And even during the course of a game, I think he's one of the most mystifying quarterbacks to watch, because he can look like,
it really is.
Look like crap for 3 series, and then he comes out and goes 10 for 10, converts a couple of third and longs with his legs. He's something to watch, but a statistic that's interesting to me, given all that, is he's number one in the Big Ten as far as quarterbacks go in red zone percentage. So, I mean, the guy just gets it done, doesn't he?
He is like the James Franklin of quarterbacks. Like, that's all, I don't know what else to say. Like, when you're describing it right there, like, that's the perfect description. They're like the perfect pairing, because it can look, like you just said, it can look so bad to a point where you're like, how are they playing this guy? How are they doing this? They have a 5-star freshman on the bench who's come in and played very well at times. I mean, we've been over this before. Will Levis transferred. But, it's like you said, Mike, I mean, it's what Penn State does as a team. If you're sloppy yourself that day, they're going to probably weasel their way through the game and be physical with you. And he is going to make plays in those really critical spots. He's played so much football. And I think that that's the point now, that he's going to take chances and make some mistakes. But as a college quarterback, he's going to get some back too. And he's going to answer the bell in the red zone. Like you said, he's going to make the tough throws and the tough plays. And if you ask him to go run the ball and get 6 yards, he'll do it, and not complain about it, like those types of things. So it's the same as it's always been against Penn State. They have a very athletic defense. They're long, they're quick, they're explosive. They can get off the ball, and they can create havoc. And the offensive line is going to be tested. It's going to be a huge test for McCarthy, just as it was for McNamara last year down there. You're going to have to – there's going to be mistakes. You're going to have to overcome them. They're going to have plays that they make that look like they might wreck the game. But you have to find a way, like you said, defensively, to not let them just slop six plays that result in 21 points. You can't let that happen. Like, that is the ultimate sin against Penn State, where they will play horrific offensive football for 50 plays and beat you with 5 because you just fell asleep. And so those are the games that they've lost, frankly, against Penn State, even the blowouts where it's gotten off the rails so fast that you can't even, the whole thing is over in a blink. So it's about being consistent and having all the things and having the type of focus they had last year in that game. I think that's the recipe, I think, when you play Penn State, because you can beat them at their own game, even when you don't have your fastball, because you can just play with better focus. And I think that that's the key here for Michigan going into this week.
Well, last year, Penn State uncharacteristically relied on the passing game. And as we know, Penn State's not built to play that way. So that flamed out in the last 6 games of the year for them. This year, though, they needed to improve the running game. There was a lot of emphasis on that in the spring, but the running backs weren't there yet. The two kids they have carrying the ball are freshmen, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. And with them, Penn State now has a legit running game, don't they?
Oh yeah, these guys are the real deal. They look like juniors. Like Singleton is for real, and what I think that they're giving them is finally, I thought Noah Cain was going to be this guy for them, and then it just didn't work out there. But for the first time since Barkley, since Saquon, Franklin has a running back that can kind of make up for the sloppiness that the offensive line usually plays with. I mean, it's a leaky offensive line that if you don't have a really good running back, you're going to leave yards on the table. And finally, for the first time in a little while here, I think they do have, and they're getting better every week, Mike, like you said, they're freshmen. They have backs that are going to not only get you whatever it's a decent front. It's not great. It's not bad. But they're going to make more than what you give them. It's a little bit like what Kenneth Walker was able to give Michigan State last year. It's so critical in college football, and especially in this league, when your line isn't where you want it. Your back has to be awesome. And Penn State finally has, I think that's been the recipe for Franklin. It would be easier if you just built a good line. But whatever, he needs to have that kind of, back there who can make plays, and they have two of them now. So they have the recipe this year for a team that can ugly it up and kind of clunk down the field. And if you're not careful, they're going to muck it up with you and beat you. And it's like Penn State, the way they built this thing, the way Franklin's built it, people criticize him a lot. And he's made decisions over the years in games that are more than worthy of criticism and blah, 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 all this stuff. But you have to respect what's there. And the consistency has been, he's kept the roster loaded with talent. They play the game a lot like Mark D'Antonio used to play at Michigan State, where they try to just muck it up and see if they can make one or two more plays at the end. And if you play that way with them and aren't mentally tough enough to handle it, they're going to beat you. And so this is a big test for Michigan, because every team that you have is a little different, and you never quite know. And I think that we haven't really seen this team get into a fight like that yet, right? We haven't seen them get into a battle in the deep water, as we'll say. And this is the first team I think that can probably drag them all the way out there. And maybe they won't, but, this is the first test that it feels maybe, I don't know if I'd say likely, but it seems like it's possible, we'll say, more than possible. And so it'll be anticipating to see how it goes.
Well as Michigan's defense has played, and we just talked about that a minute ago, we've seen some teams that do some things well, run or throw, but we have not seen a balanced attack that this defense has had to defend. Now, this offense will give us a really good idea as a whole how the defense is or where it is right now, won't it?
Yes, again, exactly, because I was down on the front there a little bit. They're going to run the ball. The physicality, the stuff you're going to have to deal with outside. The receivers are strong enough to make plays on you if you're not careful. The tight ends can get open. This is a Big Ten football team with top 15 talent, and this is not one of those games where defensively you can just leak at three spots and let Mike Morris beat two guys and make a play and get you off the field. That's not what's going to happen here. You're going to have to, everybody has to, like you said, Mike, every gap has to be accounted for, or they're just going to run the ball down your throat for 4 yards a chunk, and you're not going to be able to get off the field. That's how it's going to go. So it will be a true test of everybody on the field. You won't have to, if there are weak links, we'll find them after this game. Because, if there are obvious weak links, they'll be exposed in this game, especially in the front seven. And that's the type of test that I think Michigan needs right now. I think Michigan's a good team. I think they're a good football team. I haven't seen much from them that I would say suggest to me that people should be overly concerned. This is a game that they should win. I think, frankly, but it's also a game that they can lose, and a game that over the years they have lost games like this. So it's that first true test of, are you going to have the mental toughness that's going to match your physical talent? And Michigan is a really talented football team, especially offensively. I think they've got more talent defensively in some spots than people probably gave them credit for when the season started. But as we know, Mike, these are those games that if you're not tough enough upstairs, you lose. And this is the first real test of that, I think, for the 2022 version of Jim Harbaugh's Michigan team.
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone agrees with that. Of course, we don't know how it's going to play out on Saturday, Nick, but when you look at a lot of tape, which I have this week, and then the statistics for both teams, these two teams sure look really evenly matched, though, don't they?
Yeah, it's always hard with this one because it's always about the talent is just even. It's always so even. Historically, I think when you look at the recruiting rankings and, I don't know that they necessarily recruit against each other as much at every spot as they did when Harbaugh first got here. When Harbaugh first got to Michigan, he and Franklin went at each other quite a bit, if I remember, and I think they still do sometimes. But it's very similar. They recruit the similar athletes on defense. They go into New Jersey and get guys. They go to similar areas and similar spots, and they look for similar players, and they have the kind of a national brand that can attract that. And so they will have first-round draft picks on defense, and they will have, receivers that can make plays, and they'll have running backs. So it's always a hard game to judge, and it's always about which team is more together, which team is mentally more there right now at this point in the season when these two teams play. That is the winner every time. We used to think home or away. I don't think that's necessarily what it is anymore. I don't think we can always say that. I think when you look back over the years, wherever these teams have been mentally, and it's always up and down with these two teams. They always go on a little bit of a roller coaster a little bit historically. In the years where Penn State had it going and they look like they're together and they look like a functioning unit, they hammer Michigan. And then when the roles are reversed, Michigan hammers Penn State. And it's just this has always been a temperature check for Harbaugh and Franklin of like, where are your teams at mentally? Are they there at a championship level with the focus? And because if they're not, this is a game where you're probably going to get embarrassed and lose, right? Like, so I think this is the big test here, and it falls, I think, for both coaches. I think it falls at the perfect time, right in the middle of October like this, when you still got a lot coming up, to see where you guys are at. And I think should be a good game. I think both teams have shown some resiliency and some toughness early on this season. I think both have some good players. And yeah, we'll see where it goes.
One thing I wonder about, Nick, is if you look back at last year's game in Happy Valley, just a very close game, and Penn State was able to make it a game, and they couldn't run the football. Right. But it was, both teams kept the penalties under control, didn't turn the ball over, and when they're both playing the kind of football they're coached, that's what you get in a Penn State-Michigan game. So it usually comes down to the little things, and one of the little things that I think about is, the news we got a week or so ago that long snapper Will Wagner was going to be out. So this is the kind of game where you think, your field goal kicker might come into play here.
Absolutely.
And that field goal that was blocked on Saturday, that looked like a low snap to me that Moody just didn't get under. I mean, you saw the holder have to move it, and that worries me in a big game. But it is something to keep an eye on with a new long snapper in a big game, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen extra points in this game, cause problems. You get behind, you start chasing points. Like you said, Mike, last year's game was the first time in a long time that Michigan Penn State, and it wasn't a perfect game. It was a mucky fist fight, but it felt like the old 90s Lloyd games a little bit, where both teams were really good. Both teams weren't perfect, but both teams, like you said, we're not going to really cede much. They weren't going to give you much. You're going to have to kind of earn everything you got, and you're going to have to do it against even talent. It wasn't going to be one of these deals where you're playing a hard charging Northwestern team that's really trying hard, but you have better players at every single spot. No, this is more like practice. You're playing yourself, and it's a true look inside of how ready you are. And that's why last year's game was a really fun one. It was exciting, and it was a good one to watch. And I think this year's game can be similar. And last year, I think, spoke to the growth that Franklin and Harbaugh both, I think, sort of had mentally, because both those teams were able to fight in there and hang in there. And hopefully we see something similar. I think it could be a really good game on Saturday. And when these two teams, like you said, Mike, when they play the way they can, it can be really special. Ohio State and Penn State have put on some whoppers over the years. I don't see any reason why Michigan and Penn State can't do the same.
Well, final question before we let you get away, Nick. I don't know if this is a must-win game for Michigan. I think it is. A lot of people say it's not.
Sure.
But, if they do get a win on Saturday, and every year, every team is different. So this is not last year's team. So
exactly.
However they get it done, it is the kind of game that can be a real springboard on so many levels and change the trajectory of the season, can't it?
Yeah, huge game. And to me, I agree with you, Mike. This is a must-win. And I would say that for the exact reason that you also said, that this isn't last year's team. This is the defending Big Ten championship team with the talent to do it again. And you got them at home. And to me, a loss here would be one that you'd regret. It'd be one that you're going to look back on possibly when the year's over and say we're 10-2 or 11-1 and what would have been, right? So I mean, like, that's what I look at when I look at a game like that, and that's where their mindset should be. As a team that won a championship last year, knows what it takes, understands the opportunity here, and also understands that, hey, look, this is one that you have to get through and have to cross off and have to move into your rear view. And when you win games that we all know are those type of games that we'll see, hey, they could win the Big Ten, but if they don't beat Penn State or a team like that, it's not going to matter. Well, if you beat a team like that and you can put it in your rear view, the confidence that you get from that goes on top of everything else that, sort of reaffirms what we already knew about that you are good. And I think this team is legit good. But like to your point, Mike, I think it's a must win because they need to go out there and prove it to themselves and earn the right to have that confidence, I suppose, out of the back of it. You don't want to lose a game like this at home and go into the stretch drive with regret, because that's what it would be.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's what this needs to be looked at. And if you're a championship team that plays at a championship level and a program that has aspirations of such, then this has to be a must-win game. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think that Harbaugh, they'd probably call it a playoff game or whatever they say. I don't know what they call it, but that's what this is.
Absolutely, and as Jim said, that's what they come here for, to play in games like this.
Totally.
So it is going to be everything you want on Saturday in the Big House. Here with us on our show this week has been Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic. Nick, always great to have you on with us. We look forward to that next visit.
Absolutely, Mike, anytime.
On Quick Hits today, Trente Jones is out with that high ankle sprain. Typically, it takes 2 to 4 weeks to recover from those. Roman Wilson missed last week's game with a concussion. He's practicing this week and might be available to play. There are no other injury updates. Here are a few game day notes of interest. Michigan leads this series with 15 wins against 10 losses. The first meeting was in Happy Valley on October 16th of 1993, a 21-13 Michigan win. Last year we won a thriller in Happy Valley, 21-17 on November 13th. No one will ever forget that winning touchdown by Eric All on a bum ankle. James Franklin is in his 9th year as head man at Penn State. His record is 72-34. Last year Penn State raced out to a 5-0 start. Then the wheels came off. They ended the season 4-5 in conference play, 7-6 overall. They returned 6 starters on offense, 5 on defense. They ended the season playing in the Outback Bowl against Arkansas. They lost there 24-10. The weatherman says we'll see intervals of clouds and sunshine on Saturday. There is a slight chance of rain. The highs will be in the upper 50s with winds gusting from the west-southwest from 10 to 20 miles per hour. Saturday's game will tell us a lot about just how good both of these teams are. A win will take us into the bye week on a high note, and it will be a confidence boost for the last 5-game stretch. As Jim Harbaugh said earlier this week, these are the kinds of games you come here to play in. It's going to be fun to watch. Next week we have the bye week, or improvement week as Jim likes to call it, so we'll only have one show, and we'll have that up for you on Thursday. That does it for now, though. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Think victory, beat Penn State. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!